Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Human Rights, the show in which we discuss all things related to human rights. I'm your host, Julz Allender, and I am part of the California chapter of Youth for Human Rights International. Youth for Human Rights International's purpose is to enlighten and educate people around the world on what their human rights are, with specific focus on the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And with this education, to enable and inspire the youth of today as our leaders of tomorrow to stand up and secure these rights for themselves and all people on earth. As you know, for each show, we like to take up one right and broaden your understanding of how this right is important to you and your loved ones. And for today's show, we'll be looking at human right number 4, no slavery, which states, "No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms." Let's take a look at a short video about this human right.
So, before moving on, are there any questions?
Does this still happen today?
Slavery can be many different things. It is too simple to think of it just as someone restrained with chains and shackles. When was the last time you saw someone shackled walking down the street? And yet there are forms of slavery that exist right in front of us that we would never suspect. Around the world, one of the most demeaning forms of slavery is the sex trade. Using the word trade suggests an economic freedom that does not exist for sex workers. It is really sex slavery. Most are held in bondage without ropes, without chains. Drugs and intimidation are used instead. Drugs lower the awareness of the individual and their ability to fight for themselves, and then all manner of psychological torture is employed to keep them dependent upon their slave master. Sold off to another human being to be used as a sexual instrument would be an unspeakable trauma for anyone. Yet, this is happening around the world in every city. Being able to break free of these chains is not simple because the bondage is psychological. The slave master has what appears to be an invincible hold upon the slave. The slave believes that their master is working in their best interest. They believe they are a team and share some kind of equal footing or goal, when nothing could be further from the truth. Too often, our society portrays sex workers as people that voluntarily enter the sex trades. This is, for the most part, a lie. Most of it, if not all, are trapped in some situation and are convinced that they have to allow themselves to be exploited to get out. Too often, law enforcement targets the slave rather than the enslaver. Fortunately, there are some very smart people working to correct this injustice. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that, while uncomfortable, is essential to address. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is crystal clear. It says, "No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms." But let's take a moment to unpack what this really means. When we think of slavery, many of us might picture, again, someone shackled in chains, being forced to work under brutal conditions. This is the image history has burned into our minds, and an image from a time when human beings were openly being bought and sold as property. Thankfully, those days are behind us, or at least that's what we like to believe. But the truth is, slavery has not disappeared. It has merely evolved, taking on new forms that can be hard to recognize and even harder to eradicate. Slavery today is more insidious. It's often hidden in plain sight, masquerading as something less sinister, something more palatable, or even something voluntary. Yet, make no mistake, slavery is still very much a part of our world, affecting millions of people across the globe. And one of the most demeaning forms of modern-day slavery is the sex trade, a term that might suggest, again, some form of economic freedom, a choice, but again, let's call it what it really is, sex slavery. Imagine being sold off, not as a person, but as an object to be used at someone else's whim. This is the reality for countless women, men, and children around the world. They are subjected to unspeakable trauma, their bodies used as mere tools for profit. And this isn't something that happens only in faraway countries. It's happening right here, in our cities, our communities. It's a global crisis, and yet it often goes unnoticed by the very people who have the power to stop it. The bonds that hold these individuals are not always visible. Often there are no ropes or trains. Instead, drugs and intimidation are used to keep them under control. Drugs dull their senses, erode their wills to resist, and make them dependent on their captors. Once their physical resistance is broken down, psychological torture takes over. They are manipulated into believing their captors are their saviors, that they are part of some twisted partnership. The psychological hold is so strong that many victims believe they are working towards a common goal with their enslavers, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Society often perpetuates the lie that those in the sex trade are there by choice. We've all heard the stories of people who supposedly entered this world voluntarily, driven by a desire for quick money or an exciting lifestyle. But these stories are a smokescreen, designed to obscure the reality of coercion, manipulation, and outright slavery. The truth is, most, if not all of those involved in the sex trade are trapped in situations they cannot escape. They are not there by choice. They are victims, forced to endure exploitation with the false hope that one day they might find a way out. What makes this situation even more tragic is that law enforcement often targets the wrong people. Instead of going after the enslavers, the people orchestrating these atrocities, they focus on the victims. These individuals who have already endured unimaginable suffering are often treated as criminals rather than the victims they truly are. They are arrested, prosecuted, and incarcerated while the real criminals walk free, continuing to exploit others without consequence. But there is hope. Around the world, there are people who are working tirelessly to change this. Activists, legal experts, and law enforcement officers who understand the complexities of modern slavery are fighting to correct these injustices. They are working to shift the focus from punishing the victims to dismantling the systems that allow such exploitation to thrive. However, these efforts require our support. We must raise awareness, educate ourselves and others, and advocate for change in our legal systems. We must demand that our governments take stronger action against human traffickers and provide real support for those who have been victimized. And perhaps most importantly, we must challenge the narratives that perpetuate the myth that anyone could truly choose a life of slavery. Slavery in any form is a violation of our most basic human rights. It is an affront to human dignity and a stain on our collective conscience. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights isn't just a statement, it's a call to action. It's a reminder that the fight against slavery is not over, that it is still a battle we must all engage in. So, what can you do? Start by educating yourself about the realities of modern slavery. Learn to recognize the signs of human trafficking in your own community. Support organizations that are fighting to end these practices and provide assistance to survivors. Speak out against injustice whenever you see it, and remember, the freedom and dignity of every human being is always worth fighting for. And now to bring on our very special guest today, who is deep in the battle and on the front lines of this very issue. And I would like to welcome our guest, Matt Osborne from our OUR Rescue. Matt, welcome to the show.
Julz, thank you so much. That was very, very powerful. I was nodding along the whole time listening to you lay everything out.
Yeah, I'm sure you have a lot of reality and probably could go more in depth on it all than I ever could. So I'm very excited to have you on. I'm very interested in knowing more about the issue of trafficking, child sex trafficking in particular. And so why don't you start off by letting us know about Our or OUR, right? It started with Operation Underground Railroad Rescue. Yeah, tell us about it.
So I hope everyone was paying attention as Julz was talking, because the most important thing is to realize this exists. This isn't just something out of Hollywood. This isn't just something out of the movies or entertainment. And this isn't just something that happens over there in the deepest, darkest third world countries. Yes, it does happen there. This is a first world problem as well. Listen to the different types of trafficking that she mentioned. The vast majority of trafficking cases around the world are in forced labor, bonded servitude, indentured servitude. That is huge. But there's a huge subset of commercial sexual exploitation. And that's what we at Our Rescue focus on. We were originally Operation Underground Railroad. This was a tip of our cap to those heroes of the civil rights movement in the United States who fought slavery back then. That was such a powerful video, Julz, that you played at the outset. And just to think that is what most of us believe slavery is, the chains and the lashes across the back. But it's more insidious, is the word you use, and that's what I would say as well. It's through force, fraud, and coercion that this exists. So just to set some numbers now, and again, it's very difficult to know through statistics what is the correct statistic in terms of how many slaves there are still today, in our current day, how lucrative this industry is. But I will throw out some numbers. The best numbers I've heard in terms of how big this industry is in a monetary value is a $150 billion, with a B, billion-dollar industry. Now that's trafficking worldwide. Again, forced labor, commercial sexual exploitation, organ harvesting and trafficking, child sacrifice, just horrible things that humans do to other humans. $150 billion. It's the most profitable illegal industry after the illegal drug trade. It's already eclipsed the illegal arms trade. I think it soon will eclipse the illegal drug trade. Because think about how many times can you sell a bag of cocaine or a marijuana cigarette, a marijuana joint one time? How many times can you sell a human being over and over again? Numbers are hard to come by, as I mentioned, in terms of how many slaves are out there, but the International Labor Organization estimates that there may be 49.6 million men, women, and children in slavery today. Can you believe that in the year 2024?
No.
State Department in the United States, United Nations may say in the 20 millions. I don't know what it is, but here's what I do know. With Our Rescue, I have led almost 30 undercover rescue operations around the world over the past 10 years, working always hand in hand with law enforcement. We gather intelligence, we provide training, we provide investigative tools. Julz, not once on one of these operations was my team and I not offered children for sex. So that tells me there's a huge demand out there. And it tells me that the numbers that UNICEF puts out, between 5 and 9 million children in slavery today, that's probably pretty close because of, again, this demand. And I hope we do talk a little bit about the demand. But briefly, what do? We empower law enforcement in the United States and around the world. We give them what they don't have or what they don't have enough of, this funding, this training, these specialized tools that I hope I can share about on your show, intelligence. Then we also focus on survivor care, and that's so important. As you mentioned a minute ago, so many times law enforcement arrests the slaves themselves, arrests the victims themselves, and not focusing on the perpetrator. So we help victims become survivors and survivors become thrivers. That's our second pillar. And our third pillar is on education and prevention, precisely what we're doing today on Let's Talk About Human Rights. What we say is you don't know how to fight this unless you see this and understand what this is. And I loved everything that you laid out. And I specifically love that you target the youth. This is not cliche. The youth are the future. The youth, I have two daughters who are 22 years old and 19 years old now. The youth who are listening, you must demand that people in power fight these horrible crimes. It is there in Article 4, as we just heard, slavery and servitude. It should be abolished. It should be illegal. But unfortunately, even though it is illegal, I don't know many countries that may say, hey, slavery, you're fine, right? It's legal. However, when you look in their laws, prostitution is legal. A person may prostitute herself with no crime. Someone may buy that person with no crime. But if a third person is pimping or a part of a trafficking ring, that's illegal. Well, that's the difficulty in proving this. And that's what we need to do to advocate for more laws. So I'll find out what questions are on your mind. I can talk a little bit more about our background, but just again to reiterate, thank you, Julz. Thank you to your team. Thanks to your audience. We can't be ostriches, right? We can't stick our heads in the sand. We have to know that this exists so that we can combat it.
Yeah, awesome introduction, and I appreciate the kind words. And I'm just going to quickly hit on your background, right? So you've served 12 years with the CIA and the Department of State, and I think that gives a lot of respect is not the word I'm looking for, but power to what you're saying, because you've seen it from all different levels and can work with the intelligence and really have true numbers and things of that nature. Now, I'm going to say this. This is a hot topic, right? And we've had quite a number of organizations. Like when I first started this show, I could not believe the amount of organizations that were helping in the fight of child sex trafficking. I mean, I was like, it really opened my eyes to how insidious and how prosperous, one could say, that this disgusting, heartbreaking topic is. But your organization takes the cake. I mean, what you guys are doing on a global scale and going in these rescue missions. I've actually followed your organization for a number of years, so it's quite an honor and a pleasure to have you guys on. And you know, I'm happy to let you kind of lead the conversation in terms of what needs to be known, because you are the expert in the field, and I am, So you talked about your high tech, right, and your tools that you have. I'm happy to let you take it away on that first question and that first topic.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It was the year 2006, so 18 years ago, when I first heard about this issue working for the U.S. Department of State in Madrid, Spain, as the trafficking in persons officer. The TIP report was what I was asked to write. And that grades countries around the world on the 3 Ps. How are they doing preventing trafficking, protecting victims, and prosecuting traffickers? Julz, I'll admit, I thought this was prostitution. I thought they wanted to be out there. I thought this was how they were choosing to make a living. You talked about in your opening, it sometimes looks like that because they're being forced to do this, because they're being threatened or coerced, or they've been defrauded. Well, I admit, so I don't blame anyone out there in the audience who might think, well, no, I saw the movie Pretty Woman years ago with the Julia Roberts character. It certainly made it look like she was her own entrepreneur, deciding who she had to sleep with, how much she could charge. She kept 100% of the money. So, okay, I thought that was true, right? But that was the myth, not the reality. So my eyes were opened up. And again, I mentioned a minute ago, my 22-year-old daughter, my 19-year-old daughter. If any of you in the camera can see the gray hair in my sideburns, right? Raising 2 daughters. But they were so young at that point. And I thought, wait a sec, this is happening to their age and younger. So I completely changed my view and realized this was trafficking, not prostitution. These are victims and not volunteers. So I served a few more years and had a great government career. I was focused mostly on terrorism, organized crime, drug trafficking, and then human trafficking. Well, I had the chance to leave a government job that I loved in the year 2014 to join, at that time, Operation Underground Railroad, now Our Rescue. And we were formed because we saw there were great groups on the front end holding awareness, conferences, prevention, focused on the awareness. Then there were great groups on the back end focusing on survivor care, building their aftercare homes around the U.S. and around the world. But there were few groups that would go into the darkest corners of the world and empower law enforcement to go after children for whom no one was looking. So that's what we did. That's where we started. If any of you saw the blockbuster film in the United States last summer, last July and August, Sound of Freedom, it's still available on Amazon Prime. We don't get any proceeds, so I can promote that movie without saying, oh, they're just trying to get money. But go watch that movie. That's the opening story of our organization. I actually had a 3-second cameo. It's kind of funny. I led some of those operations. Well, over the years now, we've evolved over the past 10 years. We still will do things that law enforcement will ask us to do. We're not a vigilante group. We go through the front door. We don't go in at all. But we're doing less and less of that kind of work now. We're still on the ground, but we're seeing more and more that we can have an effect with these high-tech tools that you heard Julz just mention. cyber, going on open source intelligence, going online, social media. Yes, your the apps that are kind of dark web and sort of esoteric, secretive. But let's not kid ourselves. This trafficking happens on Facebook, happens on Instagram, happens on Snapchat, happens on Telegram, happens online, on WhatsApp. Anywhere where youth are, where kids are, Minecraft and Roblox. If any people have kids and grandkids, or little cousins, nephews, brothers, sisters. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate law enforcement on how to put profiles out there that make it look like a 13 or 14-year-old girl, maybe. I'm new in town. Is there anything to do out here? Well, who do you think is answering, right? These predators will say, hey, I'll show you around. Well, their intentions aren't good. We also are working with these amazing dogs. I think many in your audience have heard of a bomb-sniffing dog or a drug-sniffing dog. But they may not know that there are dogs out there called electronic storage detection dogs, ESD dogs, that can sniff out electronics like cell phones and laptops and hard drives. Yes, easy to see with the naked eye, but how about micro SD cards? How about USB thumb drives that could have terabytes of what we used to call child pornography? Now we call it child sex abuse material. Terabytes of images, videos of children being exploited. These dogs can be trained to sniff out the glue compound, the chemical spray that's put on these circuit boards and all of those electronic devices I just mentioned to keep them from overheating. Wow. These dogs can be trained. They're food motivated, so they know if I find these devices, I'll get fed. They're helping law enforcement, Julz, in the United States and around the world to find these predators who they know, okay, there's a warrant out for my arrest or police could come to my house anytime. I'm going to hide a micro SD card in a refrigerator, in a light fixture, under a rug, hidden in some little compartment. These dogs can sniff them out. There are 140 of these dogs of this type around the world, and in the United States, our rescue has sponsored 100 of these dogs. So we're doing whatever we can to empower law enforcement to try to fight these crimes. We're providing scholarships. We're providing specialized trainings I mentioned. And then lastly, our prevention and education program, going into schools, going into churches, going to talk to young men's groups, young women's groups, civic organizations. If anyone in your audience has ties who would be interested, it's free training, doesn't cost you anything. Our website, ourrescue.org, OURrescue.org, to find out about this. Because Julz, and you said it earlier, it's this prevention. Yes, we'll go empower law enforcement, but how amazing would it be if men mostly, but also some women, but the vast majority of men are the ones who are perpetrating and causing this demand. Let's get the great men in this audience to rally other good men who they know to not only be sort of the floor, as I mentioned. And again, this is the first guy who's saying, do as I'm saying right now, not as I did 30 years ago. I'm embarrassed to say I went to strip clubs. I went to bachelor parties. I wish I would have known back then. I can't change the past, but I can affect the present and the future. That's why I love your show right now, rallying youth who can affect the future. Let's get these men to realize, okay, we're not going to be part of the problem. That's just the floor. Let's be part of the ceiling and the solution, and rally other men to say we are not going to purchase another human being.
Yeah. I mean, it's the amount of high tech and the way things changed, is incredible. Like I knew about the dogs because I follow it on Instagram and have seen, it's like. It's not just, you're not just taking down one person with these dogs. Sometimes what I've seen, right, is you have sometimes 5, sometimes 15, sometimes 20 people in this organized, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, sexual abuse content. And they all just get taken out with the ability for the dog to sniff it out. I just think it's incredible use of humans, and I also think it's a deterrent, hopefully, that when one catches wind that this is occurring, you can easily get caught. It does help. But one thing you mentioned earlier I do want to make sure we talk about is the consumer, right? And yes. We had an individual recently on the show who is in the part of the child sex trafficking trap. Not the rescue, but the aftermath. Like, they have homes they can go to, and they're in there from typically 12 to 24 months.
Okay.
And once they are in there for longer than 12 months, none of them ever get sucked back into it. But one thing she told me is that part of what happens when the women get recruited, or men, because we know at this point it's both, is that they then have to recruit somebody else. It's like this multi-level marketing,
Yep.
you know. But anyways, the consumer. So fill us in on the biggest consumers of, I'll call it child pornography, child sex abuse content.
Yeah, and one thing you just mentioned on this sort of chain of someone who's brought in, who's victimized through no fault of her own or his own, but then after a while, they're expected to recruit other people. So if anyone could see on my shirt, the logo OUR is sort of this break the chain. That's what we want to do, break the chain of a victim becoming the victimizer. Someone who is, again, who's has all sorts of abuse happen to them, their human rights violated, but then they realize, if I can bring other people in, they'll stop raping me, abusing me, and maybe I can get paid a little bit. So we want to break that chain. And now with Our Rescue, we actually, may sound corny, but it's still true. We want to build a chain now of other organizations who are all working on this. And focusing again on the consumer, the predator. So I'm embarrassed to say, as a United States citizen, we are the #1 producers and consumers of child sex abuse material. Then it's followed closely by other Western nations, and the statistics I see, vary, but take Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, Sweden, the Netherlands. So what does this say? This says that for the most part, it's a first world demand issue, but not always. But this is where I think we need to rally these individuals, first and foremost, to define what it is. Then secondly, to say what drives a man to purchase sex, to purchase another human being. No man just wakes up one day in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and says, today I'm going to dial up a prostitute, and they're thinking, I'm going to get online and get an escort. There's a journey of 1,000 steps that leads a man to do that. Well, these first steps, Julz, as you know, are disrespecting women, objectifying women, over-sexualization of our culture, falling traps to that. And this is culture around the world, not just in the United States. Then pornography. And again, you can let me know how deep you want to go into this. I know it's a touchy subject, but this is so important. Pornography now is so rampant. It's so easily accessible. It's no longer just an image on a glossy magazine of two people engaging in sexual relations. It's on the phone. It's audio and visual. It's racist. It's homophobic. It's misogynistic, anti-women. It's fetish. It's horrible. And so many of the people that we're helping law enforcement to arrest are buying human beings because of a pornography problem and pornography addiction. We need to educate on what is on the other end of that transaction, be it a video, a magazine, some sort of pornographic scene. You have no way of knowing. I say you as the viewer, the consumer. I certainly had no way of knowing 20, 30 years ago whether that person's there of their own free will and accord, whether they've been, and think about how Julz started the show. Julz, you started the show. Drugged, forced into it. You're being pimped out. There's some threatened. You're going to do this video, or I'm going to beat you, or I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill your sister, or rape XYZ in your family. And also we're seeing pornography that is non-consensual. A girl will fall for a Romeo pimp, we call them, a smooth-talking pimp who convinces the girl, hey, I'm your boyfriend. I'm here to provide for you. Do you need money? I'll give you money. Do you need a place to stay? I'll give you a place to stay. Do you need to be told you're beautiful and sexy and important? Some girls, that's what they need. Whatever that of Maslow's hierarchy of needs on that pyramid, whatever they need, whatever the victim needs, these traffickers are filling that. Well, they have one sexual encounter. The girl doesn't realize she's being filmed. She's being photographed surreptitiously. All of a sudden that becomes pornography, and that becomes, hey, I've got this on you now. If you don't go out and do all these things, I'm going to show your pastor. I'm going to show your teacher. I'm going to show your, everyone in the school. So that's what we're trying to do at Our Rescue through our prevention and education pillar, is get to the young men early. Teach them what healthy masculinity is and toxic masculinity. Talk about the dangers of pornography, sexting, online extortion. Sextortion, another thing where, the kid might think, boy or girl might think, hey, I'm texting with, they sent me a picture and I think it looks like a 15-year-old girl and she looks pretty cute and I want to text with her. When after a while she sends me a picture that I think is her, naked picture. It's actually something someone got off the internet. I send them a compromising picture of me. All of a sudden the tone of that text message changes because it actually wasn't a 15-year-old girl. It was a 35-year-old man from New York City or Abuja, Nigeria, or Auckland, New Zealand, wherever, saying, now you're going to give me $500 or I'm going to send this picture to all of your contacts. A lot of kids in the United States, and I imagine around the world, are falling prey to sextortion, are killing themselves, are doing horrible things to themselves. And this is the message that we need to get out.
Wow. Yeah. So one point, or I'm touch on multiple points because that's a lot of really good information. Talk about the over-sexualization of society. I mean, obviously, if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, upwards there, you've seen it just drastically, in my opinion, change over the last 10 to 15 years of this over-sexualization, you know, in movies and in music and in art. And it's communicated as an empowerment deal, right? Like, well, I'm empowered, it's my body, which totally get it. Like, it's right. You are to do what you are to do with your own body in the confines of your own home. I think where you touched on this is the failure to recognize what that does to others. And specifically, I would imagine what it does to young men where, you know, they got a lot, you know, hormones flying around and things of that nature. And then it just slowly but surely allows other things to enter in, I think, in that area of sex and sexualization that then leads them down that trap to pornography. And then, well, what's next? And it's like a drug, like,
100%.
You know, I've had this fix, I need a bigger fix, and I need a bigger fix. And so I think that is a definite problem that we have, especially with the youth that leads down to this.
Such a great point.
Yeah.
Such a great point.
I forget what the other point was going to be, but, you know.
Well, if you want, I could make a couple things. Sorry, just real quick while you're thinking about that. So, Julz, what you say is absolutely correct. And again, I'm no fuddy-duddy. I'm no moralist. So the youth listening, always this 52-year-old guy, tell me what's right, what's not. But I will tell you this, that my grandfather passed away 20 years ago. Before he died, this was the early 2000s, we were watching a football game, American football game, and there's a beer commercial that came on during halftime. And there was a girl out there in a very skimpy outfit, either a bikini or something showing. And he said, Matt, that would have been pornography when I was growing up. That never would have been seen. Well, now look at what's on commercials and billboards. Look at what's on cable. Look at what is on streaming services. Again, not making a judgment, but it's a slippery slope now where there's nothing wrong anymore with nudity and sex scenes and hardcore. But what people don't realize is what, Julz, you just said. This is like a drug, this pornography, even softcore, even sex scenes, romantic scenes. The way the brain reacts, and I'm no expert on this, but when you look at your dopamine and serotonin, these other pleasing mood chemicals in your brain, it's the same thing that happens to you when someone takes a line of cocaine or someone injects drugs. It's that same issue. And none of us know, unless you have family history or unless you have a diagnosis, who has the addicted gene or not, the addictive gene or not. Some people could look at that and have no issues. Some people could look at it and then all of a sudden, whoa, it's not enough to just watch two people engaging in sexual relations, two adults. Now it has to be, as I mentioned earlier, violent or kids. And then, Julz, what you just said is so vital, that it's one thing if someone says, I'm just looking at pornography, I'm not harming anybody. Well, again, you don't realize who's on the other end, if they were harmed or not. But the way the brain works is after a while, if you are one who's prone to this and susceptible, it's not going to be enough to just watch the pornography and consume it. You're going to have to go be with a physical human being, an individual, to get that fix in your mind, to get that dopamine and serotonin. So what does that mean? Well, you got to go call up a prostitute, or maybe you've got to go get a child, or maybe you've got to go do something else. So it's not harmless. And that's what we're trying to show through our education program.
Yeah, and I think that's powerful. And I think that's a conversation that doesn't want to be had, right? But that needs to be had, of like, this is actually what is going to occur when we let these things go, or when you let yourself slide down this. So and the other point I remember that you brought up is right, the blackmail, which leads to suicide, which is just, it's like one of those things where you can't take back the action, right? You can't take back that you sent that sexting pic of the nudity or whatever. And it's now going to define, some major moments in your life, especially when you're young, and you're trying to figure things out, and you, whatever, there's many things that go on emotionally as you go through your teens and your early 20s. But, so I think, again, that education of like, don't do that, and,
Correct.
and, be okay with having some privacy, be okay with hanging on to some personal things about yourself, and especially in that area of sex and things of that nature and relationships, rather than just, kind of letting loose, which fine, again, everyone is, as we know through human rights, it is your life, and you are to live it as you want to live it. But without the education, you can't predict the consequences that come with actions. And when you have the knowledge and can predict the consequences that come with the actions, you're going to make much better decisions. And I think that's what you guys are heading towards.
It is. And one thing too, when youth out there listening, and again, I can't even imagine how difficult it is. I mean, I can because of my daughters now, as I mentioned, 22 years old, 19 years old, but what they had to live through. We had to live through challenges when I was growing up, but nothing like this. Rampant cyberbullying and sexting and sextortion. So I would just say that if anyone listening has happened to put material out there that they're embarrassed by, look, it happens. Don't let anyone ever blackmail you or extort you. Yes, it might be so embarrassing if your parent or your little sibling or your pastor or your teacher or friends would see it, but the trafficker wants you to stay under his or her control, wants you to think there's no way out. The quicker you can rip that Band-Aid off, tell a trusted parent or caregiver or friend or law enforcement. In the United States, there is a website called cybertipline.org, cybertipline, one word.org, where you can go and say, hey, this material's out there of me. I didn't want it out, or I accidentally put it out. I'm embarrassed now. They can help you get that, but do not do what these sextorters want you to do. Clam up, be quiet, continue to pay them, or worse, do self-harm to yourself or commit suicide, because there is a way to bring light to this. There is a way to get help, as embarrassing as it might be.
Yeah, and that's a great website. I had no idea, so that's really, really good to know, and we'll share that. Now, let me ask you this. Of all the things that your organization does, what do you feel is the most effective in thwarting human trafficking and child sex trafficking?
So let's look at it with long-term and medium term and short term. So long term is what we just talked about, prevention and education. You're not going to end this overnight. So many people call it the world's oldest profession, but again, that's the pretty woman mentality, right? That there is a woman who's choosing to sell herself, but remember, she may be choosing to sell herself because she has no other options or because she's had horrible abuse happening to her. We need to educate men mostly the longer term. Medium term, how do we help victims on the path to recovery where they can then tell their story? I taught what's called a John School in Texas a couple of weeks ago, where we talked to men who had been convicted of online solicitation of prostitution or in person. We had survivors come and talk to them and say, look, I used to be on the other end of the transaction. I'm not judging you men who are here right now, but I was there where men would come and 2 times an hour, 3 times an hour for 12, 14, 16 hours a day would abuse me. I didn't want to be there. So think about the next time you're there, right? That person might not want to be there. So that's the medium term, getting survivors empowered where if they want to tell their story, great. If not, they don't have to. But the short term is what we're doing at Our Rescue right now. We are empowering law enforcement on the ground. We are trying to legislate, advocate. We're trying to do everything we can to partner with other organizations to get that word out. And there is something that can be done. And again, our website, ourrescue.org, you can see different ways to get involved. One of the big ways is what we're doing today, Julz. And I'm so grateful for this platform because now we say, once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. So I would love to empower everyone within the sound of Julz' voice and my voice right now to say, I'm going to be educated. Even if you go support another organization, you heard Julz say there are so many other organizations out there. Look, we just want the work to be done. We'd love for you to support us. We'd love for you to learn about us. Go pick in your community to support, because let's fight this. I think that the charter, human rights that we just talked about, Article 4, to me, obviously that's the one that registers and resonates. But we need to do everything we can across the board to fight what I think is the most hideous crime. You heard you said the most insidious crime right now: child exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation, and human trafficking.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you any further. And so one of the aspects of the organization is you've partnered up with law enforcement, and you, as you're stating, empowering law enforcement. How did that come about? How did that partnership, I mean, obviously, I would assume with your background a little bit, but I'll let you tell it.
So think about even the United States of America, who arguably has the most resources as a country, obviously other Western countries as well. Even the United States of America does not have the funding, the training tools that they need, and they don't have the ability to get to every child who needs to be rescued, get to every perpetrator who needs to be taken off the streets. So we were started by a special agent in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We currently have on our staff current and former members of Homeland Security investigations. They work very closely in the U.S. and around the world. But what we do is we started overseas around 10 years ago because that's where the need was greatest. So we were working in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Mexico. Then we set up an office in Thailand, in Asia. Now we have an office in Africa and the Middle East. We have one in Europe. We have one again in Latin America. We go to them and we don't tell them what to do. They tell us what to do. Oftentimes, these law enforcement, host country law enforcement, they know where the trafficking is happening, but they don't have the American face or the Western face. They don't have the know-how from law enforcement to be able to go and teach them how to do it or to infiltrate those rings. We gather intelligence to help them know how to direct their operations. Now, as I mentioned, more and more countries want us to work with them. We're in some 26, 27 countries around the world. Some we have offices where we are there working around the clock. Others we come in at the request of an invitation to work for a few days. But whatever it is, we try to help them. Some trafficking happens on beaches. We help there. In bars, in red light districts, discotheques. Some happens in different neighborhoods. Wherever the trafficking is, we try to help them. And again, we are tools of that government. We don't tell them what to do. They tell us what to do. And then in the United States, because law enforcement tends to be, as you mentioned in your intro, more organized, oftentimes more sophisticated, this is where we provide these high-tech tools of digital forensics, open source analysis, even the dark web, some may have heard of as well, where trafficking is happening. Whatever it is, as we joke, it's a serious subject, but we try to use it lighthearted. It's an a la carte menu. We lay out everything on the menu, and they say a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of that. That's what we need in our country.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, going in as a servant and obviously I think having a Western face because they are the biggest consumers of it, to play the role. I mean, I saw Sound of Music, and again, I've been following for some years. So, it's very intriguing to me, the way you go about these missions and you go in and rescue the kids, or now more of obviously hitting the consumers and things of that nature, which is, I think, where we need to hit the hardest. Because if there's no consumer, there's no buyer, there's no market.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. And you mentioned too in Sound of Freedom, and sometimes we've been criticized a little bit. Oh, you guys, that's what you're making it seem like trafficking only looks like that. No, absolutely not. Trafficking looks like so many different ways. We've talked about it today. But those were operations that in some way or another we had gotten started, we had been involved in. Obviously, Hollywood will do what Hollywood does. But what I loved about that movie is Sound of Freedom had so many people come to the box office and later streaming and watch it. And then they said, man, this problem exists. Now I want to know, what does it look like in my community? So whether it's small town America or whether it's big city Latin America or Asia or across the globe, I want to learn what's happening there. And we've had so many people now coming to this cause of fighting child sexual exploitation, human trafficking, because of that movie.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've had many of friends and family that had no idea that it was so prevalent. I mean, I had a pretty good idea because of the show and because of who I interviewed. And I agree, it just increased everybody's awareness and, yeah, hopefully put them into action. And so with that, what are some informational channels that you guys offer that one can go to access and get education and things of that nature?
Yeah, so first, again, I'll start with our website and then talk about some other resources. But ourrescue.org, OURrescue.org, we have a little thing you can click, education pillar. We have something called Start Talking. It's an anti-human trafficking training for parents, talking about staying safe online. Then in the United States, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, ncmec.org, and then netsmarts.org. They have amazing videos that are appropriate for very small age group, up to teenagers, up to young adults. And then in each individual country, find out what some of the resources are in those languages. It's very important to know the laws of that country. We always try to be culturally sensitive and understand languages and understand what the laws are in each country, but you have to be educated. And we would love not only to help you make connections for anyone who comes to our website, and then I would love again to throw out the invitation, or the request, I should say, if you listening now to me and watching this show as Julz and I are talking, if you think about, hey, my school would be great, my church, my college, university, my office, whatever it is, my organization, we would love to have some training there. Again, free of charge. It's our donations who allow us, our donors and donations allow us to do this. And then again, if you are able to support $5 a month, $25 a month, this allows us to go and provide this vital training in the U.S. and around the world. It also helps us to empower law enforcement to do what they do best. But again, they just don't have the resources in so many circumstances.
Well, I hope everyone takes you up on that free training offer for schools, organizations, community centers, churches, because it's just the most, like you've said and I've said, it is the most insidious crime that is committed. 6-year-old children, 7-year-old children, 8-year-old children. It's just horrific. So definitely need to continue to do more. Matt, I want to thank you very much for being on the show, and for all that you do and have done for the last couple decades. It's not a lot of people can confront the subject, let alone do and go out on missions and go into rescuing and saving these children. So I'm very thankful for what you do.
Well, thanks to you. Thanks to your whole team for giving us this platform. And again, reiterate it, youth, thank you for being truly the leaders of tomorrow, for fighting for human rights, for fighting for your human rights, for those in your circle. And we can defeat this. I hope I leave everyone with optimism and not pessimism. Yes, it's a huge thing, but we can defeat this together. And shows like this are really a huge step that we're going to take towards ending this. I second that. We can defeat this. Thank you. Well, that's our show for this week. As tough of a subject that is and was, I hope that you got a lot out of it. I hope, more importantly, that you were educated and are ready to take action and have actionable things that you can do and you can share with your family and friends to prevent and stop this incredibly horrific crimes that are occurring around the world. But with that, until next time, I will see you then.